I'd like to call this meeting of the Sudden Valley Community Association Board of Directors to order. It's Thursday, August 29th, 2019, and I'd like to have our roll call. We have all of our directors here except President McRoberts, who's on travel. She is going to attempt to attend this meeting by telephone. She is coming in for a layover somewhere in her travels, and so we hope to include her as able. Any changes to the agenda? Dr. Brown.
We had postponed, I think it's on the agenda here, let me take a look. Yeah, under 10C, items Roman 4 and Roman 5, measure. You have gotten further input from the council on those two things. We have not gotten it. I expect it to come in tomorrow, but it's not here tonight. So I would like to take those off the agenda.
All right. We'll
D1 and D2.
D1
yes,
and
D2.
D1 and D2. Okay, that's on the proposed.
There is no D.
Yes.
Oh, D1, D2, yeah, 4 to 5.
Right.
Roman numeral 4.
Yeah.
There's no.
Oh, tapes, okay.
Anything else on the that we could adjust on the agenda?
The only thing I would suggest is, well, no, never mind. I was going to suggest moving the committee reports up front to kind of get them out of the way, but it depends on how long the treasurer's report and the GM's report are expected to be.
The very first person that I want to have is our auditor so that we can release him.
Without a doubt.
Other than that, I have no problem. If that works for any reason for someone, I don't care.
Yeah, if no committee chair has a lot of time that they want to spend, I'd suggest that we move it up right after property owner comments and just get it off the table.
Okay. Up to move it right after property owner comments. Okay, anything else? All right, without objection, we can adopt the amended agenda by acclamation. And the first thing that we have are announcements. Any announcements from the board? Director D'Angelo. Microphone, please.
Last Saturday, we had the Emergency Preparedness Committee had their first grab and grow bag workshop. We had 40 people registered. I think 37 showed up. Some others showed up, so just for the speakers. But I thought it was a pretty good turnout, and we hope to follow it up with another one quite soon. And number two, tomorrow the Emergency Preparedness Committee is having its tabletop exercise in the fire station from 10 until 1. Thank you.
Any other announcements, Director Brown?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact that I got in the mail a notification from the Department of Ecology for public comment. Joe, did you want to talk about that?
No,
well,
that's
I got
fine.
it.
I was just going to bring it up, but go ahead.
No, I'm not going to talk about it if you are. I'll just say I got mine, and that's stellar. It's really wonderful that at least we've gotten this far, and I would expect and hope that it's going to keep on going in a good direction.
And are you planning to touch on that in your manager's report?
I can touch. I was going to touch on it now. If
Feel free.
everybody over the next, well, should have got them. If not, they should be within the week. A letter from the Department of Ecology discussing Area Z for the delisting of that area. Finally, after I believe of 30 years, it has been there, and countless number of hours and days that Sudden Valley has put into it. This is the final step. It's pretty much all done. It's just, this is the last step in the chain of command, I guess you would call it, for the government to get us delisted. But you have 30 days. If anybody wants to comment to DOE, you're more than welcome, but it is pretty much the end of the cycle for that. So like I said, it's in the mail. If you did not get anything, I do have some stuff the DOE sent to us in the main office that we could give to you. It's basically the same information that was mailed out. But if you didn't get it, come on by and we will give you a copy of what they have.
Thank you. Any other announcements? All right, seeing none, I would like to move to the next item on the agenda, which is our 2018 audit presentation by Lumen Associates. And Carol, would you like to present?
Actually, I'd like to introduce, if we can get him online here, Jeremy Newman.
I'm here, Carol.
Oh, great. Okay. I thought we saw you earlier, but that's fine. Jeremy Newman is with Newman and Associates. He is the owner of the CPA firm who did our 2018 audit. And I've asked him to present to us tonight his findings on what the results were of that audit. So Jeremy, would you like to go ahead and just speak to what your findings are?
Certainly, Carol. Thank you very much. First of all, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
We can hear you fine, thank you.
Great. And can you see my 7 points on the screen?
Just the fact that it exists, the font is so
You
small.
probably will have to read them to us as you go because
can
it's
Can you
pretty
enlarge
small.
it?
Maybe enlarge them,
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go. At least, yep, I can read it here.
Is that's a little bit better?
Oh, yes.
Some can read it, that's good.
Yeah, basically, these are just the points from the Finance Committee meeting and the management comment memorandum that we put together related to the audit. So the first thing is, of course, thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you. As a result of the audit, we issued an unqualified opinion, which is a good thing for you. That's based on our audit, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position and the results of operation of the association for the year ended December 31st, 2018. So, I think that's probably what you expected, but it's also good to get there as well. During the course of the audit, the engagement does not require us to do a full-blown study of internal controls. However, it is a part of our audit to understand how the systems work and to determine if controls appear adequate. We didn't find any significant deficiencies with the system of internal controls and your processes. Based on my work on site at the community, it appears that you have good segregation of duties, which is really important, especially for self-managed, self-accounted for associations, where you have several people in the accounting department, you have people in the administrative side of the business, of the association, who interact, but who perform different tasks, so that one person or two people aren't doing everything, and obviously then the opportunity for poor behavior is greater. So I felt that the segregation of duties was good, and the segregation of the work related to those individuals was also good. The main recommendation that I have related to process, month-end close, relates to an independent, outside of the accounting and administrative function, an independent verification of monthly bank statements and investment statements. And I would recommend someone from the Finance Committee or the board obtain via the respective banks' websites, the monthly bank statements, and then compare those to the bank statements and the bank reconciliation that are prepared by accounting every month and presented to the Finance Committee and the board. I feel that that is a deterrent for anybody who might be so inclined. We have seen situations where bank statements have been edited to accommodate certain frauds and embezzlements. We didn't find that to be the case in your audit, but I feel like it's a really strong control and a really good deterrent. One of our other findings was that at the end of the year, this wasn't prevalent throughout the year, but at the end of the year, you had 3 bank accounts that with balances that exceeded FDIC insurance levels. So that happens sometimes. Sometimes it's unavoidable if you have a big deposit that's made and it tips the balance over the $250,000 mark. Otherwise, it looks like you do a good job of trying to control that. I think in the Finance Committee meeting, there was an acknowledgement that there would be a review of that and trying to avoid that situation.
Yeah.
Revenue recognition. During the year, accounting recognizes assessment income and other income in the monthly financials using the cash basis of accounting. So you record as revenue the amount of money you received during that month for the various revenue types. I believe the reason for that goes back several years when times were a little bit economically strained and every penny needed to be counted, and maybe presenting financials on the accrual basis where you're just presenting what's being billed or assessed rather than what was actually collected was probably a smart idea. I think perhaps there's an opportunity to review that now and see whether producing these financials on the cash basis month by month, calculating the actual contributions from the operating fund to the various other funds on the cash basis, whether it provides more work at the moment than is really necessary, and whether you can actually recognize your revenue based on what you assess and what you bill to homeowners and any other outside non-members. At the end of the year, and this is a usual thing, it wasn't something we requested, accounting was prepared and ready to do it. At the end of the year, the revenues are adjusted to represent full accrual basis accounting for revenues in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And the financial statements that we prepared are derived from those financial statements that your accounting department and management prepared. Point number 5 relates to the capitalization of expenditure, primarily the non-operating fund expenditure. Common area improvements. You've had a lot of work done on the roads and on the culverts and ditches. Expenses like that. I think a review, and we can certainly help and try to guide you a little bit. I think a review of the overall capitalization policy is probably worth having, primarily because at the moment, the financial statements have equity of approaching $13 million. And of that, I believe several million at least relate to the roads and other, as we call it in our parlance, real property, common property improvements, so excluding equipment, trucks, and what have you. The question is there any value to in a commercial sense to those roads? You're not generating any cash flow from them directly. Obviously, assessments is a cash flow, and that those assessments go towards paying for the roads, but you're not generating from a per use fee. I believe that it might be it's probably well worth looking at the capitalization policy, and I would recommend at this point determining whether we should effectively write off some of those fixed assets against equity, so that we have an equity balance that more reflects what our business is, how our business is performing from a working capital standpoint. The reserve study compared to the financial statements, point number 6. At the moment, at the end of December 18, association reserve funds approximated 9% of the 2018 reserve studies estimate of current costs of future repairs and replacements to reserve components. Pretty low number. The studies, the 3 studies, they recommended in the aggregate a fully funded reserve balance at the end of 2018 of just over 9 million. Currently funded at the end of 18 is approximately $1.7 million. The last point really relates to accounting software and the use of Excel analyses. My sense is that a review of the accounting software might be warranted to see if more reporting and data management capabilities can be squeezed out of either the existing software or maybe a review of potential software packages so that there's less crunching of numbers, dissecting of numbers and analysis in Excel. I dare say Excel is a great tool and it's nearly always used to further crunch numbers outside of financial statements. But I do also believe that maybe it's time to take a look at that software and see if there's you can use more if there's any more reporting capabilities or if there's a better software to use. So that's really it in a nutshell, based on our audit. Carol, do we open it up for questions at this point?
We certainly can. I just want to make a couple of comments for the benefit of the members who are here tonight. These were all presented to the Finance Committee, and we're aware of, for instance, the bank accounts that were over on in excess of FDIC. That was some new accounts that were set up at WECU that we never thought were going to reach that limit, but because of the brusque housing industry and so forth, we ended up with a lot more money in those accounts than it took us by surprise, but steps have been taken now to correct that. And we are reviewing, Paul is actually doing a full review of every single bank statement. The difference is that we are not having her pull it from online. That we have to give her, to do that, would have to give her access to the bank accounts. We're thinking about what's the strategy on that. But aside from that, we appreciate all the recommendations in the Finance Committee, both the rest of this year and then into next year is certainly going to look at each of those aspects and determine the best way to move forward on those items. So I appreciate your suggestions, Jeremy. Thank you very much. Does any board member? Yes, go ahead, Larry. This is Larry Brown.
Mike was first.
Oh, Mike is first. Okay, sorry. Go ahead,
Sir,
Mike.
I was wondering if you could go over point number 4. I believe that was revenue recognition and the review of it. I didn't quite understand.
Okay, basically, as I was working through the audit, it became, I think, fairly evident that there's, and it's probably manifested itself recently with the change in accounting manager, that it's not an easy system for someone new to come in and understand and perform all the tasks required of that position very easily. It's a complicated process in some cases, and I believe the genesis of accounting for revenues on a cash basis month by month was because two ways of thinking. Under the accrual basis, you recognize revenues when they're earned. So effectively when they're built, when assessments are billed to the owners. That doesn't consider delinquencies. And in poorer economic times, I believe, delinquencies can be very large and financially impact a community very, very quickly. So I believe that was a genesis for saying, okay, let's see how much money's coming in every month. Let's recognize that as revenue. Let's also budget for that, that way of handling income. And then let's also, if we don't have enough money to appropriate monies to the other reserve funds, per an accrual basis budget, appropriating those funds on a cash basis means that you're probably going to appropriate less than you would on the accrual basis. So you're being very conservative and very careful with the money. And I appreciate that, and there's nothing wrong with the way you do it. I'm just wondering whether, you know, fully account for that cash, but then doing a bunch of calculations to see how much money is available to move over to the other funds, whether that's truly necessary today as we stand. And if you were to go full accrual, Finance Committee and Board looking at the assessments receivable detail, the delinquent accounts every single month, you have a collections person who has good records on status of those uncollected balances. I believe that then you can adjust your income statement using a bad debt expense or an allowance for bad debt expense, so that you can actually say, effectively do the same thing. Present your income statement in a very realistic fashion based on current climate, financial climate. I probably waffled a lot, so I'm not sure if that really helped.
That helped much more than the first time around, thank you.
Okay, and then typically, and you did it, the accounting did it again this year, for the year, you know, for the December financials and for the whole year, there are some adjustments made to present revenues on a full accrual basis. And that's what we use for the audited financials.
Mr. President, Larry.
Yes, thank you, sir. Could you describe the impact on our day-to-day or yearly operations by adjusting capitalization as you suggest? Would that have any impact on practical management? And if so, what might that be?
I don't believe so. I believe, obviously, the cash, you've borrowed some money recently, but once the cash is spent, that's the biggest impact on your community, I believe. Not how it's accounted for, but the fact that the money's gone. And it's gone for a good purpose and has something that has a long life and all that sort of thing. So to me, that's the biggest impact, and how you account for things after that is a secondary. But you know, you might argue that if you're going to get a loan, a prospective lender might say, okay, what kind of equity do they have in this association? And at the moment, it looks really healthy. But I think it wouldn't take them very long to realize that a substantial amount of that equity, $10 million of that equity, relates to the net book value of your carried assets on the books. And then if you can't get any return from those assets in a commercial sense, then I doubt that they were used in terms of the underwriting for any loans. So I would strongly encourage really looking at the non equipment and that kind of property, not the trucks, not the golf equipment, not something that can be moved and can be sold, and often they are sold after they've reached the end of their useful life. That's different. You need to capitalize those, but I'm referring more to the roads, some of the buildings, some of the other common area improvements, that at the end of the day, your association is cash in minus cash out, shows you how much money's left over to continue to keep the association alive and kicking and paying for expenses. I don't believe putting the certain things on the balance sheet and depreciating over a long period of many, many years really benefits the financial state presentation for the association.
Thanks. That is very clear, and it raises a follow-up question in my mind. And that is, based on my understanding, we have never, certainly not in recent decades, used those physical assets as collateral for any kind of a loan. And there is I find that very unlikely. In your experience with other HOAs, do you find that there is or is not a general reluctance to use physical assets to back up loans?
Yeah, there is, and most of the time, lenders will secure against assessments. That's the biggest underwriting item.
So as if I gather, the end result is that we would, by this capitalization rethinking, not be tempted to think that we could, if necessary, borrow more than we really could, and then be shocked later to find out that the lender won't do that.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. Obviously, you still have those assets, whether they're represented on a balance sheet or not. You know, you would still probably disclose that information, or the lender would ask you for a list of all assets and what have you. I think from a lender's standpoint, they're interested in how much money they could get in a fire sale if they had to sell assets to recover outstanding balances on the loan that maybe is delinquent. And at the moment, they can't dig up the roads and haul them off. So I guess they could sell them for salvage, but then that defeats the purpose because the association needs the roads. So I think it's a bit of a, you know, it wouldn't make any sense to securitize using the roads.
Great, thank you, sir.
Mr. President, Sarah.
Hi, thanks. I have a couple questions for you. One, I just wanted to ask, so I'm looking at your report of internal controls and then your management memorandum, and I wanted to clarify a couple things. So in your letter, you're noting that you noted certain deficiencies that were significant deficiencies and certain deficiencies that were also material weaknesses, but you don't really identify which ones are which. The report of internal controls lists 2, and it just says control deficiencies. So I'm wondering, are those significant deficiencies or material weaknesses as well?
They are, I would, you know, businesses, I don't think they really truly fall into either category, to be honest with you. I think the independent, someone in a governance role or an officer role, receiving bank and investment statements on a monthly basis, you know, a lot of companies wouldn't do that. The accounting department does that. So I believe that for an association, however, that it's very advisable to do that. We have had situations where, and I've also heard of situations where in especially self-managed communities where there has been embezzlement and fraud or fraud perpetrated via a scheme to manipulate bank statements via, you know, using a PDF or a type of functionality. And I think it's a big deterrent if you know that someone else is getting those bank statements and they can easily compare them to the bank statements that someone else is using to prepare a bank reconciliation. However, I don't think it's a massive weakness. I think it's a strong recommendation. And then the other one related, I believe, to payroll. And I think it's similar. It's a similar thing. The way you do it is very common practice. However, I feel compelled to say that I think there are extra steps that could be taken to further, again, have a timely review of what's going out for payroll, making sure that someone hasn't suddenly put an extra zero on a paycheck or created some fictional employees. Now, your systems are set up whereby you have some of those controls, but before someone hits the button to send payroll, I believe there is an opportunity to make changes.
Okay, so then that kind of leads into my other question. One of the ones on this internal control report is about the bank statements and that you're recommending someone have online access to the banks. In my experience, that's not a typical recommendation, but is that something that you commonly recommend with HOAs specifically just because of the nature of them?
You know, it is more for this, again, for communities like yours. We wouldn't recommend that with an association that's managed by a reputable management company. But we did, you know, we took over audit of a job of a large scale community about 3 years ago, and I took a tour, for the opportunity to bid on the job, and one of the things was, has there been any fraud? And that thing came up where someone in accounting, and listen, I'm not casting aspersions at anybody in your accounting department at all, so please don't be thinking that. But in this particular case, someone in accounting had manipulated bank statements they had received or downloaded, made changes to them, and then reconciled to those revised bank statement balances, hidden their theft, and carried on. It wasn't until they were away on vacation that I believe the treasurer came into the accounting office and said, hey, I don't understand something. They eventually called the bank. The bank said, let's compare bank statements. And they said, basically, what you're reading is not what we've got at the bank. So someone has changed some of the information on the bank statement that was used at the community. So it isn't something we recommend in all cases, and it's not specific to Sudden Valley itself. It's not something that I saw that made me feel nervous with Sudden Valley. It's merely that, armed with some of that information, I felt some obligation to state that might be a good, worthwhile tool. And, you know, even if someone opens those or receives or accesses those bank statements, I believe even if they didn't look at them, just the fact that they can would act as sufficient enough deterrent for someone who might think they can get away with some kind of fraud.
Okay, thanks. Next question, one of your recommendations related to the reserve study and the % were funded. Did you guys do any work or analysis on the reserve study and the contents within it at all, or is that not something in your purview that you typically do?
Correct, we did not.
Okay.
That is simply compiled information that we lifted basically effectively straight from the reserve study. We did not perform any procedures other than that.
Okay, and then revenue recognition, that comment. So currently with doing cash basis, anything that's over 30 days old, we mark as past due, and that goes into a different pot of money in UDR. Is that something you guys, is that involved with this recommendation at all? Is that something you looked at? That would be, I guess, a major change, I would say, from how we currently do it with cash basis through the year. I know we move it to accrual for year end, but I would think that would be the biggest difference in what we're doing. And I was curious if you have any input or experience with other HOAs on doing the 30-day late write-off period.
I think
it's really short.
I do have some experience with the write-off process, and I think most associations are not very good at it if they're left to their own devices. However, I think it's a great thing to do. I think it leads to my conclusion that from an economic standpoint, there's been a lot of solid looks at making sure that you know how much money you got and how much is potentially going to come in, and you try to be as conservative as possible with the revenues. I do feel somewhat that I'm not sure, you know, again, this is only me and some thoughts, and it doesn't impact the audit findings. It's just, I'm wondering whether tracking recoveries of old written off bad debts almost by year and kind of tracking it and accounting for it and presenting it in the internal financials, whether that's really necessary. Again, some of it comes down to, are you creating a situation where accounting has too many nooks and crannies to take care of to present a financial statement that makes sense? Could you just call it recovery of bad debt? You know, it wasn't this year's assessment, so it must have been a prior year. Can you just have one line that is called recovery of previously written off accounts or something like that? And that, obviously, that's completely your choice. Nothing wrong with the way you're doing it. I just saw it as possibly a bit of an efficiency to modify.
Okay, sorry, one last question on this. I'm still a little unclear because we have two letters here. We have the report on internal controls and you list the bank reconciliation, pulling that, and then you also list not accepting cash payments. And
Yes.
then you have the management memorandum that lists findings and recommendations. So I'm still unclear of where these are on the hierarchy of reported comments.
Well, the management memorandum, I think in general, those items are not internal control shortcomings. They're recommendations based on what I saw as I worked through the audit. But it doesn't mean that if you don't do any of those things, it doesn't mean you have poor internal controls. The internal control piece is more, those few items where I would say receiving cash can create a situation where, cash can go missing, to put it bluntly. So I would recommend, not receiving cash.
Okay, so you have a class, so the internal controls is specifically recommendations related to internal controls. These other pieces are non-internal control related operational functioning of accounting within the HOA. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Carol.
I just wanted to mention, I believe, just from the standpoint of the statements, I believe there is an option with most of our banks. Well, we have several. We have 22 accounts, I believe, right now. Is that accurate, Melinda? Bank accounts, is that too many?
I think that's too many.
Okay, so not as many as that. Good. Then we got some of them consolidated, because at one time we did have. But I believe we can just allow a person access to the statements and information without having access to transferring funds. So that is something that we can look into at a future time.
Mr. President, that's all.
Still your floor, Madam Treasurer.
Jeremy, is there any parting comments, or are we covered it all, I think, pretty well?
Yes, I think we have.
Okay, great. Thank you again for all your work this year, and it was a pleasure working with you, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And right now, I'd like to call a very brief recess so that we can restage this area so that some community members can make some comments.
What would you like, 5 minutes, 7?
5 minutes.
5.
All right, everyone, thank you for that brief recess. We've got the podium, the mic is hot, and we're going to get ready to move into the next item for the agenda as soon as we all return.
We'll double check, because I want to make sure I was right.
Okay, it looks like the board has returned. At this time, I'd like to move to the first part of community comments. Our community comments at these meetings that come in 2 segments, at the end of the meeting and at the beginning of the meeting. And so at the end of the meeting, you will have 3 minutes each to speak, and we'll keep going until the last person has spoken. At the beginning of the meeting, we're going to speak until 8:15, which is 30 minutes, and then move into the agenda so that we can allow the president to participate by phone if she is still between airplanes. And so right now, if the mic is open to anyone who would like to address the... And as usual, name and address and 3 minutes. Mike, do you have the timer?
I do, sir.
Can't hear you.
Clive, can you push that microphone down?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
sorry. Georgia Allen, Division 5, Lot 78. Okay, anyway. I was really shocked the last time I came here to hear all the attacks that were leveled at what It's going to be new SGM. Sorry.
You have to kind of eat it.
Really? Okay. All right. I have never understood, since I've been here, how anybody intentionally buys a house in a homeowners association without understanding that there are dues that has to be paid. This is an HOA. And I understand that a lot of people were able to get homes much more reasonably than they could in Bellingham. All right, I don't have a fight with that. I know what it was like to be young before. But the thing is, ignorance of this is really a feeble excuse, in my opinion. The only thing is that a lot of people, as soon as they get here, are immediately being educated by the group here that I've become very familiar with, that like to convince them that their strong suit is being able to vote 60% off of anything when it came to dues. So they could go on forever with never a dues increase. A lot of owners also have to pay more. And so it's just because it's a homeowners association. The board, of course, is to blame for everything. And who votes for the board? I'm going to tell you, since I sat on this board, these people, or I did, I don't know about the rest of them, but I believe the view of this company and this whole place is different when you're on that side of the table. Because you're looking at stuff you never were otherwise going to see, to be honest with you. It's not a failure in anybody's character, but it's a different education. I can remember I can remember a member who once suggested a cost of living increase in the 80s. He said that was rejected. Another one that came in for 3%, for 3% maximum. That never went anywhere. So this kind of stuff has really got to stop. If you want to say something, do it with a civil tone. Don't walk up to somebody's face and stick a phone in their face and say, "Are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?" Multiple defeats on dues and multiple losses on various amenities are from sheer neglect. And if you enjoy standing around watching things decay, because I don't use that. I don't use any of the amenities here. But I'm happy to pay my fair share to keep them all in good condition. And there are many that are lacking. So all I want to say is, keep a civil tongue in your head. It's okay to get mad about something, but don't talk to people like they're bugs under your feet.
Dirk Elliott, Division 32, Birdie Lane. I sat on the board as an M&E chair in 1989 through 1990. My beginning was told that I couldn't speak, that I was a non-voting member. I hired Dan Rass to allow me to speak to all issues. Star Chambers went down. We went to midnight a lot of times because there was so much problems. Catherine Eureka was there, Lance, Les, everybody was there. So anyway, the road fund was built because no one was taking care of the roads, but everything was diverted. There was a problem with golfers retired getting 50% off, which I brought up. And I had a call that, do you know where your daughter is? I had to have the Whatcom Sheriff monitor the phone. There was lots of things that went on. Now, special assessments came through and we were fine with that, because then we knew where it was. The biggest problem was where was the money? Because all our money and dues that were going in were floating around in different places. Probably kind of sounded like what the guy was just telling you now, that there's still issues going on for the county. John Ackerman placed a case against them too, because of the accounting. I mean, now you're into a new thing where it's not Pandora's box, but this new state law. But it sounds to me, from what I just got back from Bangor, Maine after 2 years, right? Okay, I watched the video of the guy last year saying that someone could put a cap on dues, which I guess the group Blue is. And I would say I'm all for it, because then it controls out of control spending. I mean, special assessments was supposed to be the thing that would calm the situation and we would finally get our accounting in. I mean, I watched the deterioration of all these buildings. My daughter, when she came here in Sun, ice skated in 1985. We're long-term residents. You probably all know my wife, Deborah at the market. So, you know, we're here for good. We want honest accounting, visible things that if we're going to pay for it, yeah, sure, I'm all good with that. But, you know, there is problems with people attacking others that want to say something. That's why I'm here to say something, because you can't just say, they're all sticking the phone on my face. I've been here for years, and I sat on them. And make sure somebody's an enemy chair, because you can speak. And I had to hire an attorney to do it.
Hi, Sonia Gold, 7 Loganberry Lane. 1 month ago, we presented a petition to the board. And in this last month, and I'm saying this because a lot of members of the community aren't aware of what has been going on. And so I'd like you to actually think about this, because in that period of time, very quickly it became obvious that the board was not going to actually take action or respect the fact that that the petition, the bylaw measure may pass. As instead, you had chosen to not take the actions needed, that in case it did pass, that you had an alternate budget in place. Due to those concerns of petition supporters, our representative, Sarah Holmstrom, was forced to notice the SVCA board of possible implications should the SGM pass and the board fails to respect the will of the community. SVCA President Leslie McRoberts responded twice, acting independently of the board, first by altering the measure explanation by replacing the proposed limitations with her own. Upon advice of SVCA's legal counsel, the board was to discuss and vote on the explanation to be included with the ballot materials for that decision to be a valid act of the corporation. The explanation matters because it is what future boards or a court can look to in order to determine true intent of the bylaw. However, that evening, Treasurer Holton stated that she had never seen the petition, and as far as she understood, no member of the board had ever seen it either. The fact that you would say that, considering that you could not even take the time to read a petition that was presented by 100 standing blue shirts that represented over 21% of the association votes, because that's who signed that. 660 members signed that, holding 21% of the votes of this association, and you said you did not read it over 2 weeks after it had been presented, and you said that was your first time you had ever even known about it. The executive committee decided that night to exclude both the measure explanation and the president's letter, with Vice President Trower stating that the president's letter contained gross inaccuracies. That actually is an admission that she's in conflict. President McRoberts also acted without a vote of the board by having an e-blast with her president's letter sent to many Sun Valley owners, despite the executive committee voting that that was not to be included in the SGM materials. In the letter, McRoberts references an email exchange with Sun Valley's attorney where he's replying with options as they relate to her question of how to block the petition and bylaw amendment. The e-blast states this legislation, ESB 5334, which is an amendment to Wakaiowa, supports the notion that the board has the power to adopt a budget and associate level of assessments that it deems to be in the best interest of the community association. It strengthens the argument that the petition for bylaw amendment is invalid. However, there is yet no case law to confirm my assessment. This remains a matter ultimately to be determined by a court. This comment is not a legal opinion. President McRoberts put in that letter that that was a legal opinion. That's actually interference with this election. It's a misrepresentation. Further, it's not even an official memo. It was just a back and forth where an attorney is advising her of the options. He was simply stating the obvious that should the SGM pass and the board majority claims the bylaw is invalid, it will be a matter for the courts to determine if the president's interpretation is supported. Unfortunately, the president's letter is now viewed by many of us as an attempt to interfere with this vote. Further, ESB 5334 added nothing new to a director's duties. It specifically states that a director shall perform their duties in good faith in the best interest of the corporation and as an ordinarily prudent person would use under similar circumstances. There is nothing ordinary or prudent in the actions of President McRoberts or other board directors who that you have taken to block a vote of the members. A vote that ultimately must receive a yes vote from 2/3 of all of the votes cast. If the bylaw measure was truly invalid, as you continue to represent, then why go to so much effort and expense to block the vote? And then just today, another board executive has posted her legal summations on social media, now claiming that what President McRoberts really meant was that ESB 5334 now allows the HOA board to claim they are protecting the public interest. Public interest is defined as anything affecting the rights, health, or finances of the public at large, and what may be deemed in the public interest today may very well change very quickly, along with all of the social values associated with this. But those dealing with public interest and public interest law go through a process in determining what actually constitutes public interest. But in the end, it is still a judgment call. However, before that judgment call can be made, those determining the matter must ask themselves certain questions. They do go through a process where they need to be sure that they're complying with the applicable law in the letter and in the spirit, carrying out the functions fairly and impartially. They have to comply with the principles of procedural fairness and natural justice. Are they acting reasonably? Are they attempting to expose corruption or serious administrative issues? The issue is, I believe there was legislative overreach in invoking public interest anyway with Wakaiowa, and I know it is most definitely being abused by the board president. So now we have a board president who has gone against council's advice and an executive committee that failed to take a proper vote on the explanation. It is my true and firm belief those in control of this corporation have acted and are acting and will act in an oppressive, potentially illegal way. SVCA's president appears to have a conflict of interest,
Sandra,
which puts her in breach of her duties as an officer of this corporation. Our bylaws state that these actions are grounds for a director's removal by a majority vote of the board.
Is this your final summary? No, I'm willing to give you your final word here.
My summary is that, of course, Wakaiowa is expected to have legal challenges, including the applicability to this community. You're all very aware that there's a bill sitting there right now There's an alternate bill that's also being proposed. There is no case law, none, that supports that Wakaiowa or bylaw limitations are invalid. As a matter of fact, Representative Jeff Morris has stated repeatedly that he introduced HB 1636 because he believes the legislature overreached and has interfered with our HOA contract.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We've given you a lot of extra time, and we have people behind you that would still like to speak, so I appreciate your respect.
Sylvia Murray, I'll give my address, 30 Creekside Lane. I just want to encourage everybody, I know this is a very sensitive issue coming up for our special board meeting. And there's things to be said about both sides. First of all, we have to remember that the board members are not getting paid. They put in an inordinate amount of hours trying to do the best to serve our community. That doesn't mean we have to agree with every decision they make or with individuals, but we do have to recognize they are not benefiting themselves individually by any kind of financial decision that they make. Secondly, yes, I agree with the previous speaker, the first speaker, that says this is an HOA. And when you move here and there are amenities, you should be aware that they're going to have to be kept up, repaired, paid for. And if your realtor did not make you aware of the fact that those dues could increase, then they're not doing their due diligence. But on the other hand, I also understand that there are people who are very concerned that if the dues go higher and higher and they can't afford it, that's something that we can't just, say too bad, so sad, you moved here, right? I mean, everybody has their own priorities. One of the things that's going around, though, is that people are saying that it's in the finances, in the financial reports somewhere, which I haven't been able to find, so I'd really like to hear from somebody on the yes side of where they get this information, that the dues increase this year seems to be, we all understand that, 15% or so, and next year, but then the third year, it's all of a sudden going to jump to close to $400 a month. I haven't been able to find that anywhere, so if that's so, please let me know where it is, and if the board says, yes, it's true, please let me know. And because my viewpoint is, if we vote for the yes now, it's going to cut our prospective increase in half. That's going to do a lot of damage, as far as I'm concerned, in trying to repair what has to be done. I would rather say, save this vote, see in the future how high, whether it's going to jump up like you're saying it's going to jump up, and if that comes to be, there's no problem with bringing that to a vote again in the future, and I would be happy to vote yes with you. But I think we have to really be accurate. Oops, sorry, the red light is flashing.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mary McIntosh, 3 Whistling Swan. I have 3 questions for you guys that I really hope are answered after this time period. First of all, I have emailed all of you and not gotten a response. I would like to know why there's 0 responses going on. Mr. Akla?
Yes.
I brought it up last time that you are not responding to emails. I want to hear specifically from you as to why, because I have a list of people who have emailed you that you have not responded to.
Okay.
You guys are supposed to represent us, and if somebody reaches out, it's only to be expected to at least get a response. I also wanted to ask about Paula's credentials. If Paula's going to be going through the bank statements, what were her credentials to do that? Why was she chosen? Is it possible to maybe find an accountant who's willing to volunteer their time and do it, somebody in the community? I'm pretty sure that there are several that would volunteer for that. It might be a better choice than having somebody like Paula do that. And then thirdly, I wanted to ask why there's a camera in the back. That's kind of new. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Jack McBride, and I live on, I don't know the lot number, I can't tell you that. I live on Logie Lane. I just moved here 3 years ago. I didn't intend to speak tonight, I just came to see what was going on. I've already voted no on this measure, just so you know that, because I don't believe, for two reasons. Number one, I know a number of these board members, and the new ones, I went to the nominating meeting, listened to them talk, and I was impressed with their capabilities. I trust these people. They are our neighbors. They have to pay the same bills that we pay. It's not as if, you know, they're getting some sort of a deal and we're not. So and I've also gone to finance committee meetings, I've gone to communications committee meetings, and I've watched how these people behave and how they act. There's a lot of good, smart people. They're doing a lot of hard work for us and for nothing. They spend a lot of time on this, whether you know it or not. And so I have faith in these people. And at the end of the day, they pay the same bills we do. Let's face it. And so I just think to put a cap and a limit on what we can do from year to year is dangerous in two ways. Number one, I think it's a bad precedent. Number two, I think it doesn't give the board the opportunity to manage and our association manager the opportunity to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Things will vary from year to year. The idea of whether it's 7% or 14% or whatever, it's going to vary from year to year, and it should, depending upon our needs. Now, we have been underfunding our operations for years here, folks. You've been getting a free ride, whether you realize it or not. And it can't go on forever. We're finding that now with our roads, bridges, etc. We've torn down all kinds of buildings because they just rotted apart. And so this is not a way to run a business, and this is a big business. So we just have to change. And I think the new state laws gave us that opportunity to take control of our operations in a meaningful way. And I'm very pleased with the way the board has handled that. So please keep up the good work.
Thank you. It looks like we have time for 2 more speakers at 3 minutes apiece, so thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mike Coito, 190 Polo Park Drive. So to speak to the previous gentleman, suggested that those of us who have lived here for quite a few years, I've been here for 16 years, suggest that we've gotten a free ride for these last several years is ludicrous. Sorry, sir. Since I moved here, the dues have increased 179%. It's very disappointing. But more disappointing than that, I guess, is that the last time I was here, I stood up and asked a question of all the board directors about whether you supported the ballot measure that's going to be put forth in the SGM. And if you do not support it, I'd like you all to please explain why you do not support it.
Alma Deckard, Sudden Valley Drive. I just want to say one thing here, and that is, I'm sure everybody in this room has heard about the principle of the frog in the boiling pot. I'm speaking to the lady who just spoke over there, who said, if the dues ever got to, as I understood it, a point where she personally would find them difficult to pay, then she would be willing to vote yes. I hate to say this, but some of us are there now. And that's why we're all voting yes on this. And that is what the people who do not want to understand this don't seem to be able to get through their heads. We can't afford 100% dues increases. We can't afford that.
Thank you, and thank you for brevity there. It allows us to have another speaker.
David Narcico, 15 Bramble Way. I'll be brief, I think. I think the petition with the 7% for the dues increase and the 15% on the special assessment seemed quite reasonable. I know there were a number of folks who thought 3% was appropriate or 5%. The sense is that it was mentioned, listen, we do have to pay the bills. So coming down and proposing something like 3 or 5% was out of the question. And also the sense of dues plus special, there are opportunities, or there are needs. And I know a lot of folks, whenever we had some discussions about these things, thought that was appropriate. Wasn't too high, wasn't too low. It paid a lot of the bills. We have a lot of catching up to do, granted. I've been vilified for a lot of my yes votes on a lot of things. So folks have been, have known my record, and generally I've said a yes to a heck of a lot of things. And I've shouted loud and clear about that and proposed it, and was part of some presentations we had here in the barn. So I feel like I've really understood we do have some needs, but also there needs to be some reasonableness. I guess one might say I'm a believer in the golden mean. Too much, we've got a problem. Too little, we have a problem. I think people think that the board not just makes certain kind of decisions for whatever the needs are, but there was a reasonableness, a sense, a wisdom that says, wait a minute, we have a diverse community that's developed over the decades. And we no longer are what we had at the beginning when people owned second homes here. So there was a level of affluence that people could afford certain things. We have people now with families that getting started in life, things of that nature. This was an attempt to take a look and make sure we don't fragment and turn into 1,000 pieces our community, because many of us have really developed friends, family here. And I think a lot of this is hitting a lot of folks very hard. And some people have already moved. I've got friends and neighbors who've already sold their houses and are out of here. Other people are planning and getting their houses ready. That doesn't seem appropriate. And it seems like the 7% is quite reasonable. So anyway, I voted, I have 3 properties, and I voted 3 yeses with regards to the proposal. But, so I'm encouraging folks to do that, but I think that 7% is quite reasonable, and I would like the folks to really consider that, and also for the board to not, might say, check all the loopholes to try to find some sort of legal way of nullifying this. I think that would be a big mistake and would further drive us into tribes and fragment this as the community. I think we want to stick together. Thank you very much. I hope
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's take a few minutes for board responses. Mike, do you have a list?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was Carol first. Mr. President, Carol.
Okay, I want to set the record straight on something that I have been told was said, but I encourage you all to begin with to do your own research. Do not believe that because it's said over and over again that it is necessarily the truth. What I said at the last board meeting when we were discussing the explanation for the petition was that I had not seen the explanation. I still have not seen the explanation except what was put in the views. And I could not accept the calculations that were in the views because they were inaccurate. So I did my own exploration, and I encourage you all to do the same thing. I know it's a difficult process, but you are accepting someone else's opinion about whether the 7% is correct or not. And I encourage you to look at what 7% really means and what it's going to come to. So I spent a great deal of time many, many days and many hours reading the petition and understanding it, I felt well enough that I sent out to all of the board members my interpretation of what the dues would be this year if, in fact, we followed the tenets of the bylaw that is being proposed. And it actually shows that the amount that we are proposing for this year is $3.66 less than we could assess you if we followed the guidelines of the proposal. So I am excuse me, I listened very carefully to you, Sonia, and I'm going to ask you to please listen quietly. I'm only asking you each to do your own research. Make sure that what you are voting for is exactly what you want. I'm going to answer the question for Mike Coydell about the ballot measure. I am voting against it. I'm not sure if that's appropriate as a board member, but I'm going to speak as a homeowner. And the reason is because I think if you give a board 7% plus a 15% assessment, automatically every year, that's what they're going to request. And because of that, they will instead create, okay, you're shaking your head, but if you feel that boards are like that, then that's what they're going to do. And in that case, you will end up with fitting a budget into what the dues is instead of creating a budget and then fitting the dues to the budget. Be very careful what you're voting for. In any case, the executive committee's action was not to vote against the explanation because we read it and felt it shouldn't be. It was because we didn't have an explanation. It had not been put in a board packet. We hadn't seen it. I can't vote for something that I can't review and can't trust the numbers on. The $400 a month, I've said this before, but I'm going to speak to the people who are here that are new. That $400 a month is a requirement in all of our budgets. We have to include in our budgets every year what the deficiency is from each homeowner to our reserve study. So one of the things our auditor talked to is the fact that we are underfunded. Each year we have a certain amount of repairs and replacement that we're required to do, and for every year that we are not funding that amount, we have to tell each homeowner what their indebtedness is for that year. So in 2023, we have a large number of things that supposedly are set to be done. We don't typically do them in the months or the years in which they fall. We spread it out or we get a loan. So it's not really a dues. It just says in this year, if you needed to do all those in this year and you were going to do it without a loan, that's what it would cost you. But it is not a proposal for what the dues will be. We have no intention of raising the dues to $400 a month. It would be a much more graduated increase, and that would probably, something that large would go into a loan that would be stretched out over 10 or 15 years. That's it.
Mr. Chairman, Sarah?
Okay, a couple of comments back to community and also in response to Carol's comments. The petition explicitly says that this is not an automatic increase. This is a maximum increase. That doesn't mean 7% every year and a maximum special assessment assessed every year. This is a maximum amount. Obviously, the idea and hope would be you wouldn't maximize it, but if it would, if they did every year, there would at least be a limit, which we have no guarantee of today. Also, Carol did put together a spreadsheet that she sent out to the board about what dues would look like if they maximized the 7% and the 15%. And I want to thank her for doing that because I think it shows how extremely generous and reasonable this petition is. Yes, if you increased our revenue by 7% and then you took 15% of that and you maximize the special assessment, which would be an additional $12 a month special assessment to get to that 15%, dues would be $147. Again, that $12 in a special assessment additionally does not exist today, but if it were to be done, dues would be $147 a month. If that doesn't prove that this is an extremely reasonable petition, I don't know what does. Also, about being put in the board packet and the petition explanation. It is no coincidence that Leslie responded noting about the changes to the petition explanation after I would have had any ability to get it on the agenda packet in the packet. So I was forced to have nothing but the discussion.
Ma'am, please don't speculate like that. Please don't speculate.
I'm not speculating
about
at all.
another's intentions.
Not speculating. Also, if the barn was going to be done in 2022, it would be $400 a month, which Carol was just referencing for the reserves. Again, those are staff recommendations. When we went through that stuff with the barn 8, with this barn, it was originally 2020, and then it got pushed out to 2022. The years those are happening are coming from staff recommendations, they're not coming from our reserve specialists. And again, the whole idea is it would be pushed out over multiple years via a loan, and that should be reflected in the proposed dues based on how we would actually fund the project.
Mr. Chairman, Larry.
The RCWs do now and have always required us to say what the reserve study would cause dues to be if everything recommended by the reserve study were spent in the year the reserve study recommended it. It has absolutely nothing to do with actual dues and never has. And by the way, that number, $400 or whatever it would be, regardless of this petition, whether it passes or not, whether the board follows it or not, that particular set of figures will be part of ballot measure number 1 regarding the dues, because we are required to make that numerical calculation every year and give it to the community members every single year. And so as long as there is a huge chunk of work to be done, that there will be a huge number reflected in some future year. Now, whether it's 400 or 500 depends totally on how much gets deferred and when it is going to be deferred to. The reserve study is not a Bible, but the RCW exists to give people some understanding of what might be needed in the way of special assessments should things go downhill really fast and we could no longer postpone them anymore. That number that you didn't like and that somebody apparently misinterpreted and then got spread around, as we have said time and time again, nobody had a plan to impose that in any year. We do not have the authority to impose it in a future year, and we would not plan on doing it. You will see that number. That will be on the ballot, and it's not being voted on. It's merely a disclosure statement required by the state. We have no choice on that. Now, there was a reference made to 100% dues increase. I have no idea where that number comes from because there is no 100% dues increase at all. For those who do not recall, last year we had a proposal from the Finance Committee for 2 ways to fund what needs to be funded. There was an option 1 and an option 2. The board decided against my recommendation to go with option 2, which spread the increase over last year and this current year and next year, 2020. That increase is that was recommended then is almost exactly the increase that is currently being proposed. And thereafter, for every year thereafter, the proposal was 7% increase per year. But this year was important in order to ensure that we had enough funds to begin crawling out from underneath this underfunding that we have had from the very beginning. The very first year that this community met, 1971, this community got pissed off because of a $5 dues increase. And the board there had increased it only by $5 because they thought what they really needed, which was, I think, $11, was too much. So from the very beginning of this community, no matter how much dues have gone up over the past decades, we have been underfunded. You could read it in the views all the way back. And the arguments that are being raised today are exactly the same arguments that have been made for the last almost 50 years.
Point of order.
Then I would like to ask staff if staff has any idea how many homes are being sold on the market today, already existing homes, and has that dramatically increased from the last 2 or 3 years?
Oh, let's see, I think there's about 160, maybe 170 homes that have sold this year on the market. I don't know what you have on the market right now. The last few years, you're somewhere in the range of 200 to 300 homes a year that were being sold.
So it's fair to say that in August, we're not that far off from the average over the last 3 years.
You're a little under the average, but again, without having any idea what you had on the in the market in your pool.
Right. My suspicion is very clear. We have not seen a dramatic increase. There may be some people who have moved because of their fear, but we have not seen a dramatic increase in home sales. And we have, over the last 3 years, seen a dramatic increase in home building. And I can guarantee home builders are not building in an area where they believe they cannot sell. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I already voted no, and part of the reason is very clearly we, as a community and as a board, do not have the authority to violate the law. When Kiowa says what the law requires of us, we have to follow it to do our duty as board members, and our duty is to the association as a whole, period. The association as a whole. The other reason that I don't approve of this is because when I look at this, this allows virtually unlimited dues increases of every kind. It says 7%, it says 15%, and then you talk about do not serve to limit assessment increases. So that means both dues assessments and special assessments, which exceed 15%. Now, I'm not sure why they're only referring, they didn't refer to special assessments, they said does not limit assessment increases for anything if there are certain things that apply. The very first one is authorized or required by statute. That's what the bloody Kiowa does. It authorizes and tells us, it says so in the statute, you're more than welcome to read it.
Let's stop this back and forth, please. Let's stop this back and forth, please.
Well, I still am a licensed attorney, and I have to follow the law because I am a licensed attorney.
Point of order.
Ma'am, necessary.
Please, this is not, this is disruptive. This is disruptive.
And
I will call a recess if we continue this disruption.
And it says that it is for unbudgeted emergency expenses. Well, who the devil defines what an emergency is? There's no definition in this. The board defines what an emergency is. It says a threat to personal safety where a threat is discovered. Well, it doesn't say when the threat must exist, and it doesn't say when it must be discovered. It doesn't say a threat today, and so therefore I would argue that this very much allows the board to say, we see a threat in 5 to 10 years, and we need to increase the dues now in order to avoid a sudden increase later. So this language does not do anything of what the people who wrote it think it does. And so therefore, those are the reasons I voted against it.
Are we through with the board responses? Do we have
No, we're not,
okay.
Mr. Chairman. Andrew.
And Paula.
I think there are 2 member comments to the board members at large. I think one was Mary and Mike. So to Mary, I got an email from a Mary and I responded, but that was 2 weeks ago. And you know, being busy isn't an excuse, I know, but I have time next week. If you send me a reminder email, I'm happy to set a time to meet with you and go over anything you want and listen to you. So again, sorry if I dropped the ball, and I probably did. It's super busy. I won't talk about everything going on in my life, but I think Mike was, why do we, explain if we don't support the petition, but I guess I do support the petition in the sense that I understand from another member comment, and I think board comment, that it does set a precedent, which, yeah, it certainly does with future boards that could, you know, take advantage of increasing the max, you know, over time, but if it's what the community wants, then I'm, you know, supportive of the petition.
Mr. Chairman, Paula?
Thank you. There was a specific question to me on my credentials for reconciling statements. And so I just wanted to address that. Number one, to tell you what that is. I am provided with bank statements, and I'm provided with printed out end of month statements from the accounting department, and I make sure that the numbers match. I look at the numbers on one and make sure that they're in compliance with or not compliance, but that they match up with each other. I don't have access to the bank accounts, nor do I want it at all. It's simply going back and looking at them. My credentials for that, for over 20 years, I've been a divisional and a departmental manager that has developed, implemented, and delivered on budgets. I don't mean to minimize it, but it's not that hard to reconcile those numbers at the end of the month. So that's where my credentials come in budgeting, in implementing, developing, and delivering on budgets. So I hope that helps.
Mr. Chairman, General Manager?
As far as the question for emails, yes, there was quite a few emails that came in on a certain topic. It was directed to the board, and I do not have the authority to speak on behalf of the board.
Anything else?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to the first item of the amended agenda that was moved. The committee reports and voting is necessary, and I can imagine that we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on these, with the exception of possibly NNE, who does have one piece of real business. So, Architectural Control Committee?
As submitted.
As submitted. Communications as submitted.
Document review there's nothing to submit.
Okay. Emergency Preparedness Committee?
As submitted.
Finance Committee?
As submitted.
Long Range Planning, is there anything?
We did not meet.
Okay. Nominations and elections.
The two first items are as submitted. There was an appointment of an NNE committee member, and that person is Fred Haslam, and he will serve from now until November 2nd. I will, right after, through the election, we have 3 positions in NNE who will be elected at that election, and he or other people may submit. I will not be submitting. And I just want to remind people that we have a deadline coming up for...
Could you use your microphone a little closer, please?
I have a loud voice and I forget it needs to be amplified. We have 11 positions total that will be elected on November the 2nd. So I hope everybody is checking the announcements in Valley Views and other places and submitting appropriately.
Okay, thank you. And next is the Parks, Trails, and Rec.
Parks and Trails.
No, it's...
There you go, that's good.
Shazam. Parks and Trails met last Monday, and we talked about the master plan for parks, and that we discussed the where we are with the dog park, We discussed where we could be if we had a master plan for trails, and I think that was about it. The minutes will be submitted to the secretary, I'm sure, before the next board meeting.
All right, sorry for that alarming noise. Before we wrap up the committee stuff, we did have a couple of resignations from committees. Number one, from Parks, Trails, and Rec, Carol Trower has resigned. And Carol, would you like the other one?
Yeah, Mitch Waterman has resigned from the Finance Committee, and
okay, so let's, that was the committee reports and no necessary voting. Next is the general manager's report. Joe?
Good evening, everyone. Just a few things. The second annual Bite was held August 10th, and it was down at the marina. Unfortunately, Mother Nature rained on us, but we still had a pretty good turnout. Cafe 104 was there. In the package, you can see that the sprung structure is up. Just waiting for PSE to get the electric into it. It is all wired up, just waiting for that to be turned on, and that should be somewhere middle to end of September when they get it hot. Also, our new IT person has been reaching out to Comcast to find a better way to get us some better services and possibly some major cost reductions, but that's still early in the stages, so that's where that stands with that. ACC, there has been 60 requests. Most of those are exterior alterations. I do believe there are, and Rich can correct me on this, 18 or 20 new builds for this year?
For this year, no,
Microphone, please, Rich.
Microphone.
we're close to 30.
Okay. We had 34 last year, correct?
Correct.
Dues collections, we are at 96.3%. Some other things that we have done, the NNE manual has been revised and has been voted on by the board and is now adopted. All ballots for the SGM have been mailed out. I know there was some confusion there, and that was on the printer's part. When you go and have duplicate lots, the post office does not recognize that. We did contact them when we got the list, and they dropped the ball on there. But everything is out. The first round of counting for the ballots was duplicates, so everybody has received them. If they have not, contact the office, and we will get you another ballot. As this time of year starts winding down, so does the staff. Most of our seasonal staff will start to unwind as the pools shut down, as Mother Nature decides to get cold on us. Recreation, right now we have, they're mowing 20 parks. You'll see tonight in the package we're asking to work on a couple more, one here and one at Gate 5. Again, with recreation, we are starting to slow down. The pool will close Labor Day, September 2nd. They do have some extended hours just because that is the last day. Also, if anybody knows anything about pools and food service and all that good stuff, the county always has a way to sneak in and try to catch you with something wrong. Our main pool and quiet pool did pass our surprise inspection, so everything was good on that end. Golf still remains strong. They are 11% higher than last year. On a good note, continue that. September generally in the golf business starts to slow down after Labor Day. However, we do have, we picked up 3 new events. The Washington State Women's Public Links will be here. Aslan Brewery will be here, as well as UBC College Invitational. Those 3 outings alone, if sold out, is $20,000 more for us at that point. In the package, you can also see we have the sprung structure drawn out. You can see how the layout and the footprint for that building will be. It is, if anybody does have the chance, go take a look at it. This is a pretty good building. We could probably put 3 basketball courts in it. But it is a good building, and it's a nice thing for the community. Security-wise, they did have the go bag thing on Saturday, and then tomorrow there is an update for some training, which is a good thing. For some of our staff will be there as well. And on a little bit more important note, school did start the other day. I ask everybody in the community to please drive slow and look out for our little ones. They are our most valuable asset.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the general manager? Sure.
I have one. Under HR and Administration, Joel is going to be starting in September.
Yes.
So I guess I didn't realize Melinda wasn't with us permanently?
No, she was it was in a temporary basis.
Okay, and can you tell us about Joel?
Joel was,
I was going to say, I'll mention, because Joel actually was a temporary for us for 3 months while Jennifer was on leave for her first child, and he did an exceptional job for us. Jennifer highly recommends him because he understood our system. He's a CPA, and I found him very good to work with. He was very thorough and so forth, so I think he'll do a great job for us. We're delighted to have him back.
Any others? All right, thank you, Joe. Next is the treasurer's report, and voting is necessary.
So, shall I have you present this, Joe? Because I know you're going to do this on behalf of Maddie. We actually had this brought to the Finance Committee. This is for playground improvements. This is already in our SURF plan to be done this year. The money is due to be spent to upgrade 1 to 2 parks every year, as able. And so Maddie's not here tonight, so Joe is actually going to present the funding request. And so if you would do so, and then I will make the motion.
okay. In the package, there is 2 parks that we're going to do. One is right back here, and the other one is at Gate 5. What we're working on is trying to improve the parks as we go forward. That is something that is a community, that the whole community can use, and it is for the children. Part of the thing with Gate 5 is that's going to have to be dug and worked on, and my dirt window is closing rather quickly. But the park out here will be it'll be above ground. There will be no digging. They're just going to expand the current footprint. And if you've been out there, you've got 2 or 3 different playgrounds. We're going to connect them all together and make it one big long one. In this as well is some playground equipment to upgrade. I do believe it is the one on Gate 5. It's put some more structures in there. As Carol said, this is in our parks, or I mean, it's already in SURF. It has been voted upon. And with the dirt window closing, we waited a little bit longer than what we wanted to due to the fact of parks trying to get some more stuff done, but now is the time where we have to get this done, and we should have it done within a month to 6 weeks. Any questions?
Do we have a motion?
I do. I move that we approve $50,000, including tax and shipping, allocated from the SURF account for the improvement of the Gate 5 Park and the community center playground areas.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mike? Any further discussion?
Well, I just want to clarify. First, I want to point, please thank Maddie, because she obviously has been managing the pools well if they passed a SNAP inspection, and I really appreciate the work that she's been doing. Now, the other thing, I had thought, just as an attendee of, kind of late, actually, at that Finance Committee meeting, that the new piece of equipment was going in out here. I just, I'm unclear.
Yes. If it's going here, that's fine. It is going out there? Okay.
All right. And I told her already, but what looks like our options, I had only seen the top one before. They're both great, or they're all three great. They look like sculpture and they look really cool.
Yeah.
So that's an awesome thing. And that's it. I just want to know where it was going to go. And just for history's sake, the upgrading that's being done at Gate 5 is to remedy a situation that existed from the day it was put in. Volunteers created it, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It was, I think, my first year on the board, but volunteers got out there and we cut down the trees, and then staff, which was the management company, and I believe that reputable is not a word that I would apply to them, but the management company put bark out there that was completely illegal. It did not comply with anything that should have been done. It was not what we were told was going to be done. And so that's great that we're finally able to get around to upgrading the safety of that area. It's just really stellar that we're getting around to doing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to?
Call the question?
The question's been called. All those in favor? That is unanimous.
Thank you.
Somebody has been.
All right, and to continue with the July 2019 financials.
Yes, Joe, do you have any comments on the financial? Oh, Melinda,
Melinda's
I'm
here.
sorry. Melinda's here tonight. Great, thank you. Would you like to make some comments on the financials?
Yes, I just wanted to touch some,
And
touch
for those
base.
of you who are not aware, if you haven't found them, they have been passed out to you in a handout. We're still working on them.
Yes, due to the complications, like the auditors brought up with the many different pivot tables and Excel sheets, something has gone awry. So these are straight out of the.
Please reassure us that something has gone awry, but
No, just the.
money's where it needs to be.
Yes,
We just.
everything's posted, everything's accounted for. It's the pivot tables and the Excel formulas. These, what you have in front of you, are straight from C3, which is our accounting software. We're just strong with cash right now, which is good. Our net operating assets is up from June. June was 790 and some change, and now it's 918. So that's strong. I just wanted to give, the reserve cash balances are kind of self-explanatory. Surf the roads, emergency operations, UDR. The next is the monthly collection rate, and I left the whole thing so you can see where we are. We're still strong at in the high 90s at 96.3%. So that's Angie's doing a great job. The next is the reports you are familiar with, the capital projects, SURF being first, and what is still open. We just closed 2. Roads on the next page, and what is open. And the UDR on the last. And if you have any specific questions, Joe and I could answer them for you.
Sarah, go ahead.
2 quick questions. Is there not a income statement that comes straight out of C3?
It does, but I just wanted to give a broad stroke of what's going on.
Okay.
So you will be provided with a more comprehensive financials. So.
Okay, and then is this on cash basis still, or is this changed to accrual? How are we doing it currently in C3?
It's cash basis.
Okay, thanks.
And then the last is the lots and dues analysis, which you guys are familiar with, so. Any other questions?
Carol?
A couple of things. I just wanted to mention that I know there have been questions on occasion is when we close accounts and we have money left over, what happens to the money? The money actually goes back into that reserve account and is there for a future project. So, and occasionally we'll see that, now this one, I need to ask about the one that's security maintenance. Wait a minute, is that the one? Security maintenance, parks and maintenance vehicles. There's a negative number in there. It looks like we've been invoiced for $1,351 more than was already budgeted. Yes, no? You're not sure?
I'm not sure. I'd have
Okay.
I'll look into that, Carol. and
Okay,
get back
I'll
to you.
follow up with you guys, or with Joel when he gets here in a week or so. That's the only thing I'm concerned about. Typically, if we have one over like that, we don't pay it until we correct that with an additional funding, but we'll check into it and see what the issue is. It may just be a wrong number, I don't know. We'll maybe something of those adjustments that you're waiting to get some help with. Okay. And then the other thing is, I just want to thank Melinda for your time with us. We really appreciate all your help. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure meeting you and having you with us.
Mr. Chairman, Larry.
Yeah, Carol mentioned that particular item regarding vehicles. I saw a flatbread truck hauling a security vehicle back into town last week or the week before. I'm just kind of curious what that was about, because that the cost of our security vehicles seems to be a sore spot down through the years.
One of the operators from Pacific, one of the contracted employees, had a minor altercation with a stop sign. Pacific is taking care of it, and it's at Olson's right now being repaired.
Super duper. Thank you very much.
Stop sign, okay?
The stop sign is okay.
You mean you put it back, or the car actually didn't make it through the stop sign?
The stop sign did not move.
That's
Okay,
clever.
Carol, is
Okay.
that,
That completes our report. Thank you. Joe, Melinda, thank you.
okay, let's moving on to continuing business and voting as necessary. The first item we have there are to ratify the executive committee votes that were taken at our last meeting. The first one about the vote to not include the president's letter in the SGM ballot packet, and the second to not include the explanation of an SGM ballot packet.
Can we move to include both of those as a motion to ratify those?
Second?
Yep, yep.
Okay, any discussion about ratification?
Yep,
of-
the second, was that there?
Yes,
That's
that was.
Any discussion? Then by acclamation, should we ratify? Okay,
Done.
those motions are ratified. Next is the adoption of the 2020 draft budget. Carol, would you like to present that?
Yes, I'd like to move that we adopt the draft budget per page 52 of the board packet this evening, which is the one that we have been discussing recently, and then I'll make a comment.
Second. Okay, moved and seconded, and Carol, you get the...
Yes, on page 51, I just wanted to, I don't know that we've actually read this into our minutes at this point, but when we first had our discussion with the department managers and then a follow-up discussion to it, there were a number of things that were brought to the group to consider, and Joe and the staff went back and made those adjustments. So the first thing was to increase our advertising income from $30,000 to $32,000. So that provides us with a little bit more on the income side of our budget, and then also increase the fitness and pool income from $4,900 to $7,500. And then to increase the hazardous tree removal pruning expense from $20,000 to $60,000. That was the original amount recommended by staff, and the reason is because that's what we spent last year, was $60,000 on removing hazardous trees. So we moved it back up to the 60. And then Joe went back to the managers. There was a request not to provide pay increases to anyone on the staff unless they were affected directly by the wage increase that just was passed by, or was passed before, I guess, several years ago by Washington State. So if they were affected by that, they could potentially get a pay increase. Everyone else was not to get a pay increase. And so he removed about $73,000 from the payroll expense. Now, in addition to that, I will say that included in the remaining payroll expense is the 1.5 added to the maintenance staff to start to work on the backlog of corrective and preventive maintenance that is still looming over us. We need an additional person to help with that. Other than that, the dues then moved from $145.65 down to the $144.31 per month for developed lots, and down to $134.67 for undeveloped lots.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Chair.
Sorry. Larry.
Yes, thanks. I'd like to move to amend for the same reason that I said well over a month ago. I move that we add $12 special assessment for the next 5 years for SURF, $12 special assessment for the next 5 years for roads, for the very simple reason that for as long as I have been on this board, we have never adequately and appropriately funded roads the way our own restrictive covenants require, which is that they are fully funded as recommended by the engineer. Even this would not do that. We need to begin adding to that account. For the same reason, for years we've been told we are severely in what could be called both an emergency, fiscal emergency and physical emergency, severely underfunded in our SURF account for what we know is coming up. And the major one that I will mention is the marina. It's coming up, and the marina has several aspects to it: the parking lot and the harbor. Those are going to be very big, and if we don't start saving now, we're going to have to spend a lot more later. So that's my motion.
That was a motion. Is there anyone to second the motion? The motion dies. Back to the original unamended motion. Do we have more discussion?
Yeah, oh, I apologize. I was...
Microphone, please.
I would just...
Microphone, please.
Thank you. I would just like to make a comment, not propose a change, but the decrease in the payroll expense of $73,000 is where compression was going to take place, and compression is when people who report to you make closer and closer amounts of money. I have reservations about people not getting increases. I have reservations about the cost of turnover. And I also have reservations as an owner of this entity that I personally am not paying or might not be paying staff appropriately. We have an obligation to do that. So that's my comment, and I'm not suggesting that we change the budget proposal this year, but that we take note of this and thank the staff who said, okay, I won't get a raise this year, and some of whom live in this community and are going to be voting on the proposed dues increase and et cetera. But so all my point is keep an eye on it and do not expect year after year that that would happen, particularly in markets where talented people are very well headhunted and taken out. That's all.
Thank you, and I'd like to make one quick off-base comment. I wanted to thank the gentleman in the audience for working so hard years ago to make it such that NNE could speak.
Yes, I did want to thank that person. Thank you.
I would like to echo Director Langdon's statements. It always seems as though budget cuts hit labor harder than anything else, and to those people that deserve these raises, I apologize.
Hear, hear.
Anyone else? Sarah?
Yeah, I just want to make the comment that this is a 14% increase, which is double what the proposed petition is coming up at the SGM, and obviously that hasn't happened yet, but I just want to make note that this is double that, and it is disregard of the wishes of a portion of this community.
Yeah, so.
Call the question.
All right, question has been called. All those in voting for the adoption of the 2020 budget, please vote to approve. Okay, that anyone opposed? All right, one opposed. Thank you. Moving on to the proposed amendments to Sudden Valley bylaws. Director Brown, would you like to speak to any of that? Is there anything that that we need to do now?
There really, the major thing, at least that I can recall, the major thing was that we wanted to get some advice from council with regard to the 2D measures to apparently bring the existing bylaws into more accurate compliance with the old HOA law. And while I have heard orally, I'm not prepared to discuss that tonight because we haven't yet gotten a written opinion. I do full well expect what that opinion will say, and so there is no need to discuss those at this point. And as far as I'm concerned, unless someone else remembers some other issue that is escaping me at the moment, I think these are ready to be, except for the D measures, all ready to be moved onto the ballot, but I would probably feel better about doing that individually. So I'll start with what is called Measure A, although it may be called something else on the ballot, but certainly right now it's called Measure A. And I move that this be included on the ballot, although the only actual document would be the summary that you see on page 53 or page 1. Because the text itself is much longer than we need to spend on sending through the mail. So the text, full text, would be online, and this was
Before we get into discussion.
Yes, could we have a motion then, please?
You had a motion.
Oh, that was,
That was the motion.
we need a second. That's what I'm,
I second.
All right, thank you. And just to finish that, it's, not putting it in is exactly what was done a couple of years back when we had a similar full set of technical fixes to the bylaws, and the bylaws do not require the full text to be mailed out, particularly when they're this long and detailed. The actual measure, which shows what text is being amended and where, and how, will be online and available for anyone to see. And I am proposing that the document on page 53/1 would be included as an explanation in the ballot measure.
all right, that's been moved and seconded. Does anyone want to discuss it further?
Call the question.
Question's been called. All those voting for this being included as motion. That's unanimous. And I want to remind the community that in order for any of these proposed amendments to go into effect, they individually would have to receive a 2/3 vote of the community who votes.
Okay, moving on. I move Measure B, which would delete 2 standing committees, be placed onto the ballot this coming AGM.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Again, as we discussed, this streamlines the bylaws by removing the Document Review Committee and the Long Range Planning Committee from required or mandatory creations. That would be up to any board to create as necessary and to structure as necessary.
Any further discussion?
Basically, that just would remove them from being a standing committee, if you want to use the vernacular.
Yep. Yep.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All those voting to include this measure in the ballot. That is unanimous. Next.
Okay, Measure C. I move that Measure C, as included, this would be pages 73, 74, be put onto the ballot.
Second.
Moved and seconded. More discussion?
The explanation of this is primarily to adopt the fact that the timelines that we are now forced to deal with are stated by the new 6490-525. And so what this does is it basically just makes it vague. It takes all the specific mention of particular timelines out of the bylaws so that we don't have to change them if the statute changes. And this also reduces the power of the board, as we discussed with regarding to the capitalization strategy. It's very unusual for HOAs to pledge assets. The new statute, in fact, makes it very, very difficult to pledge assets, and it seemed to be a wise move to simply prohibit the board from pledging physical assets. This still allows the board to use assessments as a pledge for loans. And then the last one has to do with lot consolidations, and it basically comports with what was discussed the last time the board looked at this. It just says that consolidations no longer have to automatically be approved. The board has to automatically look at every one, cannot delegate to staff, and that once any reduction in assessment is approved, if any is approved, that never gets changed. So that's the totality of this.
Any other questions, discussion?
Call the question.
Question's been called. All those in favor of including Measure C in the ballot materials? And that again is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to Measure E.
Okay. I I move that Measure E, which you'll find on page 77, be included in the ballot.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Okay, now, this basically in as generic a way as possible, without copying any language with regarding to percentages or anything else, simply aligns our bylaws with whatever state law says on this. However, a court finally interprets Wakaiowa, whatever that may be, this is what will follow, and we won't need to tinker around with our bylaws anymore. It's just, whatever the state law is, that's what we do.
Any further discussion?
Call the question?
Question's been called. All those in favor of including Measure E on the ballot? All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
I will work with NNE to make sure these get done. As you all know, the numbering may change, and it's not clear, but I will give a hint that the two measures D1 and D2 may either be substantially changed or removed. So that's not likely to cause any delay in printing of the ballot.
Okay, moving on to new business, which we have none of. And so we are back to property owner comments. Anyone like to address the board at this time, please? Sir?
Couple things, Dirk Elliott, 3 Birdie Lane. Anyway, when we sold the cable rights to the tower up there, McCaw, to TCI, it was supposed to be guaranteed that we'd always have Channel 10 for Sudden Valley, and they were supposed to come through with new fiber optics here. When Comcast took it up, now I'm hearing that you're just trying to open a discount. Go back to the original documents of the sale. Where's some power on it? That's been overlooked for years. Now, second thing, we got major problems, not only in the marina. Let's talk about the tunnels under the road. That's over $1 million something coming up. Our roads never met standards. We pay taxes, but we get nothing for it. It's hard to get anything out of the county to do anything here. Originally, we had security guards that were here, and the sheriff even wanted to deputize them so that they could carry arms. But that got shut down. Now, the other thing was,
No pun intended.
a lot of people wanted the golf course sold. Financing 50%, that way there's always revenue coming in, but cash income coming in. I'm hearing you have advertising of $36,000. I mean, at one point they were even trying to do a resort here. And they had condos that were going, and they were advertising the heck out of all the stuff, that this is some resort. It's a community of families. So, I mean, that's one thing. Eagle Ridge, just down there, my buddy owns it there. He was happy to buy his house because he goes, I'm not going to be like you guys in Sudden Valley with all the problems. We sold all of course. They don't have no issues. Dudes don't have a problem. Something to look at.
Thank you. Could you, one quick question. Do you remember about what year that contract would have been?
Yeah, that's when I was on the board. Yeah,
Okay.
that's when it was in 89.
Thank you.
89. So that would be leverage.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Anyone else? Oh, we have, welcome back, David.
David Narcico, 15 Bramble Way. Just a comment on the business about the exceptions on the petition. I mean, the sense was if there were no exceptions to what was proposed, it seemed to me there would be a big problem. People would raise up and say, well, wait a minute, things that you didn't plan on are going to go awry. And this was an attempt in some ways to say, tell you what, there are exceptions to this, and a reasonable board could take a look at not just the anything that you have, you can find holes, loopholes in some sort of whatever. I mean, a good lawyer will find loopholes in anything. They said you have 10 lawyers, you're going to get 10 different interpretations of what that particular law or legislation is. So this was an attempt to say, tell you what, there will be exceptions. And if that happens, you know, these things ought to be looked at and covered. And there is a sense, if you have a reasonable board with wisdom, you understand the intent and you don't abuse that. All this is an attempt to do was to make sure we had some wording in there that said, you know, there are exceptions and the board necessarily needs to be able to address those. Yet use a bit of wisdom when what's the spirit of it? What's the intent of that particular measure? And it feels like the board has a moral obligation, not just a legal one with regards to finding all the little loopholes one could in any particular law, but to go along with the intent. That's all we're asking. Thank you.
Thanks.
Penny Carter, 37-8. I just want to thank the board for going ahead with the budget that the staff and the Finance Committee worked so hard to put forth, and there was a lot of give and take there, and we appreciate that work being valued enough to go ahead with that proposal and not try and force fit something that we don't know whether or not the community is going to support ultimately. I think that was the right decision tonight, so I appreciate that you did that. I also appreciate that I believe that the board, this board and many boards in the past, I believe, have followed the intent that I think the petition that we're voting for or voting against, in either way, in the SGM. I think that intent, the boards in the last 15, 16 years that I've been here have followed that. They've tried to be very reasonable. They've cut back in many cases to try and there's almost always been a discussion about whether or not the community could afford the proposed dues increase, and were influenced in most years by what dues increase was proposed, was influenced by the fact of what they thought the community could afford. And it's not always an amount that the community would necessarily support or think was reasonable, but I believe that the boards, all the boards, and I look at boards that I favored and boards that I didn't favor, looked for what was in the best interest of the community and in the best interest given the circumstances that we had. So I appreciate the work that you've done, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Hi, Steffi Jones, 15 Cascade Lane. I just wanted to address some of the comments earlier. You know, it's a feeling that those that support the petition are just walking around complaining and that we should know better because we bought into an HOA, and that's true, and a lot of us willingly bought into an HOA, but that doesn't change wanting some limitations. That has nothing to do, the two don't have anything to do with it. I like living in an HOA for certain reasons. I also bought before this law was put into play, so that's a breach of my contract. And a majority of us are not walking around saying, I don't use that, I'm not paying for it. I haven't even been to the pool, and I love swimming, you know, and I don't see a problem in paying for that. I voted for it. What we're asking for is the ability to be able to budget and to know what to expect. And so I think it shows great intent when you're voting against giving us that. You know, you have to empower us to be able to feel like we can trust you. And so that's another argument. Well, we voted for you, we should just trust you. I don't give blind faith to anyone. I will double check and look into anything. And this is my investment, which is my business. And I think that anybody who went about their day just saying, oh, they got this, that's okay, my investment's gonna be just fine, is, you know, very naive. So I don't think that that's a valid argument, and I have problems with that. And then the statement is thrown around, you know, I understand you guys are volunteers. There's still an expectation. And, you know, I'm sorry that you're working this hard and not getting paid, but I don't think that that's an argument because it's also known up front. And, you know, I appreciate it, but, you know, those are other arguments that I don't think should be thrown in here. And so if we're gonna treat this like a big business, then we should have professional behavior and we should have all of those things that they have in big business. So, I also want to know if, Larry, your explanation of the law was your legal opinion, because it is somewhat misleading to some people who, you know, may look at that and say, well, Larry's a lawyer and he's saying that this is the case. So I would like you to clarify that. And Penny Carter, thank you, if you're still here. You made the comment in May on the Finance Committee meeting, and Paula has asked us to watch it several times, where you wanted to know about community input. And how are we going to get the feel for what the community wants? I'm almost done. I feel like that petition does show quite a bit of community input. So that, I didn't see that happen. I didn't see that, you know, we came to town halls, we were shown things, but I didn't really see a lot of input from the community. And so that I'm not very pleased about. Anyway, thank you.
Any board responses?
Sure, the question was placed to me if that is my legal opinion. It's an interesting question. I'm not licensed in the state of Washington, so I cannot give a legal opinion in the state of Washington. As I have said, I have 30 years of experience, I have training, and I know how to read what I read. That's the reason I actually sided with the board's position in defending against the Kurt Casey lawsuit, which you may have heard discussion about. That's because the legislature wrote a statute that actually did not say what the plaintiffs believed it said. And the counsel that the board had hired agreed with my interpretation, or actually I agreed with his interpretation, and so we fought that through. That has some bearing on the issue of what I said earlier about my reading of what this petition actually says, because the Kurt Casey opinion in part stands for the proposition that it doesn't matter what a legislature thought it meant. They live by what they said. When a court looks at a statute, it doesn't get to try and telepathically figure out what the intent was. They look at the letter of the law and they interpret it. And that's what I did. I looked at the wording of this petition and I find it very lacking. And I find that, again, as the Casey said, which, by the way, Sudden Valley won, as the Casey opinion said, basically, you live by what you say. You live by what you write. And if that's not what you meant, then you need to go back in and fix it. The state thought that they had imposed this current majority voting against, majority of everybody voting against. They thought they did that in 1995. Most every other association in the state believed that's the way it was, and certainly all the condos have to do it that way. So it was a big surprise to them to find out that no, that really didn't apply. And most of those associations were scared pretty well that they could end up with a bylaw amendment like the bylaw that we had. And the legislature finally said, you know what, that was a mistake. We didn't write the bill the way that we had thought we wrote the bill. So they rewrote it. And you see the result. That's Wekiwa. And again, if some legal authority, such as corporate counsel, sends in a written memo as a licensed attorney, that is a legal opinion. Period. That's a legal opinion. It doesn't have to be approved by a court. That's a legal opinion. If they write it and send it in and they say, well, you know what, this particular section, the way I read it, it says blah, 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 that's the way it's going to be interpreted. And if that's not what the community thought they were saying, they need to go back in and review. That's what the democratic process is for that we have here, that allows petitions to be made and put forth. And I would merely like to say, as personally painful as this process has been, having to listen to some of the comments made, this is an exercise of the community's democratic rights. And whatever the vote is an expression of that democratic process. Win or lose, that's how the system works. So I applaud those who felt the need to start a petition, that they had the energy and drive to get out and do it. I disagree wholeheartedly for the reasons that I stated, but that is somewhat irrelevant. It's a democratic process. It is not an autocratic process. So that's all I have to say on that.
Anyone else?
Move to adjourn.
I would love to adjourn, and we have, I'd like to do one thing first. I'd like to thank the Finance Committee and staff for their work on this, the budget that was just adopted for 2020, and thank the board for adopting a 2020 budget, that the final amount of that budget number comes out to be less than was contemplated as the worst case by this petition. And so thank everyone for getting this done. And now we are adjourned at 9:27.
9:27.